Today's episode is brought to you by the Reese Hotel in Queenstown. Now is the time to book your 5-star hotel stay at the Reese Hotel in Queenstown, proudly New Zealand owned and operated. With stunning lake and mountain views, courtesy town shuttles, a private beach and jetty access, and staff that'll blow your socks off with their impeccable service, it's definitely not your average weekend getaway. Guests can experience the talents of Chef Corey Hume at True South Dining Room for some exquisite locally sourced produce, or their lobby bar with the award-winning wine cellar bursting with local and international vintages, or simply work your way through their cocktail list. Perhaps if the mood strikes, break out the in-house Bentley Continental for a quick lakeside spin, or an airport pickup with a difference. The video you're seeing now, I took over the weekend with my stay up there. This is the view from one of their balconies. While all the rooms come with balconies and heaps of space to enjoy these views, now is the time to book your weekend getaway with a special discounted price. Book now via the hotel website. That's the Reese, THEREES.co.nz. Use the promo code COVID-19, one word, to receive a special offer of 10% off any accommodation. That's thereese.co.nz and use the promo code COVID-19 for your getaway.
The Behemoth Brewing Company presents the Department of Conversation with Pat Brittenden. Behemoth, give me something hoppy.
Hey, g'day guys. Just a quick interruption before we start the podcast. Full disclosure, this podcast has been edited heavily. We kind of pride ourselves around here of not editing podcasts that much. We either live stream or we record them and play them out as live. It's sort of one of the things we do when we can tell guests nothing that you say, none of your words will be edited out. This podcast, however, we talked for, I'm not sure of the full time, close to 3 hours, between 2.5 and 3 hours. And there was a lot of repetition in the conversation. A lot of answers were said more than one time, or a question was answered, and then an extension on that answer went back into something that had already been said. So I have edited this one quite heavily, although what I've tried to do at the best of times is leave in all the content and just take out the sort of repetition and the stuff which wasn't relevant to the conversation. Now, if you do want to see this podcast in its entirety, Jeremy Morris, the Christmas lawyer, look him up on YouTube, the Christmas lawyer. He is going to post the episode in its entirety. So he will have from beginning to end all the goods, bads, and averages in between. All the me talking about, I better get a move on because I'm off to the dentist, will be on his YouTube channel, The Christmas Lawyer on YouTube. If you want to see the abridged version, which I think has got everything you need to know from the story and this conversation, then sit back and enjoy, because here she comes. How are you?
Very good, thank you. You said that you liked your interviews organic, so this is going to be pretty organic because I nicked myself shaving.
Yeah.
So I've got a little blood there.
Well, as you can see, shaving is not a prerequisite for conversing with me. So.
Well, I've got to maintain a certain look to achieve the persona.
Sure. And the persona is?
The Christmas lawyer.
All right. But then again, you think about Santa. Santa doesn't have to maintain that persona. He's pretty Christmassy, isn't he?
That's true. But he doesn't typically go into court. Although he did in my case, actually as a witness in our 2-week-long federal trial, which was back in 2018.
Yeah, well, let's talk about it. And I've got, and I'm sure Apple's fine with us showing a little bit of the preview. So let's just show people what we're talking about. I'm only going to show the first kind of 15 seconds because I want people to hear something that I heard, and then I'll explain why this is why I want to play. This is like the first 15 seconds of the promotion for the film Twas the Fight Before Christmas, a documentary featuring Jeremy, who we're speaking to today, and just have a listen to the very start. That's all I really need people to hear.
I am the only American, probably the only person in the world who has been banned by a federal court from decorating for Christmas. I love Christmas.
So that's actually all I want to play, right? Actually, what I might do is I'll put that in mute, and so people can still see the images in the background while we talk. I came across this documentary, and I call it your documentary, but obviously you're the subject as opposed to the filmmaker. And I watched the start of it, and to begin with, I thought it was a mockumentary.
Okay.
Like to be honest, I've never seen Ted Lasso.
Sure.
But I looked at you and I thought, he looks a bit like that guy Ted Lasso. Is this a mockumentary? Because that opening statement is obviously a ridiculous opening statement for obviously reasons we're going to talk a little bit about. But I thought it was a mockumentary to start off with. And then obviously after about 2 or 3 or 4 minutes or whatever it was, it was evident to me that it was a proper documentary, proper meaning not a mockumentary, an actual documentary about, shall we say, conflict in a neighborhood over Christmas celebrations and more, but we can delve a bit more into that as we talk. So yeah, I mean, do you get, I was wondering, do you ever get people who are saying this is not real, this is actually, I think you're talking about your grandfather being in the silent films. I've seen the documentary 3 times, right? I think you talk about your grandfather being in the silent films and being a performer, and you kind of go, this is me now. And do you ever get people kind of accusing you that this is actually all put on, this is all fake for publicity and stuff? Has that happened at all?
Well, yeah, I think they say that in the film too. A lot of the neighbors make it out that somehow a lot of things were contrived to make a name for yourself. And actually, in the rarest sense, you almost couldn't come up with a situation more impossible, in the sense that I can actually prove that it's not. I mean, you almost could not conceive of a way that someone could prove that, but I actually can. And the reason, and this is not in the film, is I actually consulted with lawyers, and before I moved into the home, and we came up with the idea that initially we thought, well, we want to contractually make it clear that after they had violated what we believed had violated our civil rights, and a jury would later agree with us as to that. I'm sorry, I'm still bleeding from shaving. But we presented them with a settlement agreement. Now, again, this is not in the film, but we presented them with a settlement agreement. And when I tell people this, I say, well, it's only for $500,000. And they decided they wouldn't sign it. So obviously I wasn't out for publicity. And then I say, no, I'm just joking. It was for $0. So I waived all my legal rights. My signature was already on the document, and all they had to do was sign it. And all I would get out of it was a promise, essentially, that they would leave our family alone, a de-annexation, that they would separate our home from the rest of the subdivision.
I think what we probably also need to do, because we kind of jumped into that first question and went down a path of answering it already, but I don't feel like we've completely actually set up your story very clearly for people yet. So and I know it kind of started in 2014 with a light show there. Can you give us sort of a 90-second synopsis of who you are and what this documentary is about and why it's on Apple? What is it called? Apple TV Plus or Apple TV or whatever it is? Apple TV, Apple Plus.
Apple Plus. Apple TV is the device that sort of makes everything streamlined. You can download Apple TV as an app and then get Apple Plus as a subscription service.
Okay. Yeah. I got it. I bought a new iPhone and they gave me 12-month subscription as a part of the purchase. I'm like, cool, free streaming gear. So if you can give us a short synopsis of, sort of who you are and why this documentary was made, that will then allow me to go through to have a chat with you about the actual documentary itself, and not necessarily about the documentary, but about your perspective, your thoughts, some of the things that I would be keen for you to clarify, etc. So if you can give us that.
Well, my name is Jeremy Morris. They call me the Christmas Lawyer. I actually have a YouTube channel that I just started about 2 months ago called The Christmas Lawyer. If anyone wants to check that out, just The Christmas Lawyer, sort of in response to this movie. But basically, I was born in California, lived all over the United States, ended up going to law school in Virginia. As you pointed out, my grandfather was a very famous silent film actor who had a great influence on me sort of as a showman. And then in 2013, 2012, I moved to Idaho. I had a great passion for Christmas just as a child. I put up massive Christmas displays. Some of them would take like 2 months to put up. And that's a little bit reflected in the documentary. In Los Angeles, where I grew up, And then, of course, in Idaho, my dream was to one day put on just sort of a lot of lights, not necessarily any kind of a program or a show, but just a lot of lights. And by an act of fate or God, whichever your preference, if you're a person of faith, I believe it was an act of God. I happened to have inherited a cotton candy machine, repaired that cotton candy machine. And then on Halloween of 2014, it was the first year I decked out my house, covered it in Christmas lights, and just wasn't really going to, do anything for Halloween. I don't normally do anything for Halloween, but my wife was gone, took our daughter away to some other event on Halloween. I'm alone in the house, get a phone call from a friend from college who said, you really should take that cotton candy machine your grandfather gave you in his will, take it out front, make some cotton candy, and turn on all the lights that you've been putting up for the last couple of months. So I did. And to my shock and complete surprise, it would turn into thousands upon thousands of people coming to our house that Christmas. And of course, my wife came home to hundreds of children, which is what sort of spurned the idea that I'm going to do this a massive event. And it became so massive that we decided we needed to move to a new home. We did. We found a new home just weeks later. And out of that home became an enormous worldwide controversy, which was documented by CNN, Fox News, BBC, UK Daily Mail, all over the world, which has gone on now for, I guess, about 7 years. In that my neighbors had indicated that they didn't want our family in the neighborhood, and they had cited some very unfriendly reasons, some of them relating to poverty, some of them relating to my faith and the faith of people that live here, which is illegal in the United States.
Yeah, look, I want to, because one of the things I'm interested in is also the language that is being used around this. Like you've said, for example, they admitted to what they had done. In the documentary, it shows, I do have their names jotted down, but one of the participants, Jennifer Scott, who said when you were recording her, talking to her, that she agreed with you that there was some language that was discriminatory in there. Is that you saying that that's quote unquote they admitted? Because if it is, that's one person of the group who has admitted something in your favor. When I hear they, I'm like, the whole group has agreed. So this is what I do for a job, and I've worked in the journalistic field for a long time. Words are very important. And when I hear someone say they admitted, that to me says the whole group admitted. When you're saying they admitted, are you saying a representative from the homeowners group said something that I've linked to it? Or are you saying they all admitted?
Sure. They meaning the entity, the HOA, as an agent. So I'm talking about agency here. So like you said, a representative. But this is actually the president. This is literally the president of the group.
Gotcha.
And so literally you could have a Coca-Cola truck driver in the United States who smashes into you. And who do you sue? You sue.
Look, I got you, and I understand, because I just want clarity. That's what I look for.
For the sake of clarity, Pat, let me add that other members of the HOA had similar admissions. Not so much to literally saying, yes, we discriminated against you, which was what she said. And then she goes on to say, and I told the other board members that.
Someone who used racist language sometimes may not be a racist. They might say something that's inappropriate. They might use the wrong word, but they may not be racist. Someone might say something. What's the latest thing? Someone might say something which is deemed transphobic, but they may not be a transphobic person. And I often, I'm not often wonder. I was watching it thinking, is there, because that was my ponderance about the discriminatory language. Does that therefore mean there's discrimination? Is it one of those instances where someone has said something that could be taken as discriminatory language? Is that separate and different from actual discrimination? Especially when, and I don't know the full story, obviously, I've acknowledged that what ends up on the cutting room floor you don't know about, is that the whole crux of this to me, well, not to me, but it's in the documentary, is discriminating against your religious beliefs. When the people in the cul-de-sac, the neighborhood, whatever it is, seem to mostly have the same religious beliefs. Like, I think the husband of the head of the HOA at the time was a pastor. So just trying to marry all those things up together and figuring it out.
Sure. Well, obviously there's no blood test to find out who's a racist, who's a bigot, who hates Christians, who hates Muslims, right? And so we understand that. When we talk about discrimination, no court system in the United States ever determines whether or not you are a fill in the blank. What they look at is, was the
action. Yeah, okay.
Action discriminatory, exactly. So I believe, I mean, this is just my own belief. I believe that this particular woman got caught up in something, that she was driven by her relationships with other people in the neighborhood who were very anti-Christian, who had moved to this neighborhood, who did not want to have anything to do with Christianity. And some people ask me, by the way, because it's not very clear in the film, how was this even a Christian thing at all? And that is the easiest answer there is. I wish it had been in the film. And that is, we were handing out candy canes, Santa Claus was, with Christian messages to literally thousands of people. And in that very first phone call, the only phone call I had with Jennifer Scott before she contacted the neighbors, which is very well described in the film, and then letters start going back and forth about how we're going to tell him he can't do this. The only phone call, that very first phone call, I called it my ministry. And the reason I talk about it being my ministry is because of those candy canes.
Couldn't one argue the point then that the light show is not the religious context, it's the handing out of the candy canes? So couldn't one argue that the camel and the Santa and the candy floss, yeah, that's what it's called, all that sort of stuff is not the ministry? You've just said it. It's the handing out of the candy canes.
Well, that was the overt religious part, was the candy canes. But we have obviously a living nativity. We had like 20 actors, so they're like walking around. They're talking about the Roman centurions, talking about the birth of Jesus. We had a little prayer box that if anyone needed, prayer for something bad that happened in their life, someone actually converted to Christianity on my driveway. So clearly this was, as far as the lights go, I mean, to me, that's sort of pardon the pun, I guess it's sort of funny, but like a moth to a flame, right? Like a little flickering light, the little glittery object. And so that sort of brings them in. But it's not just, sure, I would never say that the only purpose of the event was to evangelize or that people would come to Christ. I mean, of course, I'm a Christian, so I want that. I think it would change their life for the better. But I also wanted people to have fun. I'm a normal human being, I want people to have fun. I wanted kids to have something to remember. I wanted adults to, what do people like smile the most about? What do you, Pat? I don't know your background, Pat, but I would think most people, maybe I shouldn't speak for you, but a lot of people, when they think about their best memories of childhood, they go back to Christmas. This was for anyone in New Zealand who's saying, well, I wouldn't want that in my neighborhood. Pat, I don't want this in my, because it's like a lot of noise, a lot of whatever. This is for 5 nights for 2 hours. 5 nights. So literally, while people in this neighborhood too have Christmas lights on for a full month until 11, 12 o'clock at night, I had my lights on, even the lights themselves, only during the show for a total of 10 hours out of the year. That's what this whole thing is over. 10 hours. This is wrong. You should be allowed to have on your property, your land, if it doesn't violate any rules, the right to do what you want. And if those are your beliefs, they're your beliefs.
But I guess that's the whole debate, isn't it? If it doesn't violate any rules. I mean, that's the crux of it. You say no, they say yes, even if there's
anyone to show me where
Sure. But that's the debate, isn't it? The debate is, does it violate the rules? Because no, I don't think anyone, including them, would disagree. I can't speak for them with you that if it doesn't violate any rules, and they've found rules that it violates. And I mean, I know you're going to disagree with that because you're saying it doesn't. But what I'm saying is, from sitting on the outside, literally thousands of miles away, that seems to be the crux of the conversation. Does it violate the rules or not? And a lot of the things you're saying as absolute fact in my head, not because I care about the legality of it, but because I've done this a long time and broadcast for a long time and spoken about court cases for a long time, I hear allegedly. Well, yes, allegedly. Well, yes, allegedly, because we have your word on it. But for example, you said that you have evidence for the assaults on the 4 women.
Yeah.
Other than their own personal testimony, which the judge that you have various opinions on obviously didn't rate. you say you recorded everything. I want to see the footage, or I want to see the evidence. So
I don't,
in my mind, I go allegedly. That's to me is allegedly, because it's a first-hand account from one person. Show me the evidence.
Yeah, I don't have obviously footage of women walking down my road getting assaulted. What I do have is when this thing was becoming a court case, I put out a message. Anyone that came to my Christmas program who had anything bad, because there were rumors.
Sure.
In fact, there were
personal testimony. We don't need to belabor the point.
Testimony of women who do not know me.
Yeah, sure.
Who do not know me, who were telling pretty similar stories.
Sure, I accept that. I accept that. But from my mind, watching it, I go allegedly. Right? You're saying it is fact. I'm not challenging you. You're entitled to do that.
Well, one of the neighbors in the film, toward the very end, says, "Yeah, we all did bad things, and I saw the man running down the street." So one of the neighbors, and this was the first time, as I'm watching the film along with everyone else around the world, I'm blown away. Wow, this is an HOA board member. She was on the board, making the first time I've ever seen it an admission that one of these people was chasing after a woman. And so if you watch that woman, the Kim individual, she says toward the end of the film, we all did things. She goes, I gossiped. And if you look real close on that part of the film, she says, and I saw the man running down the street. Well, that's into the testimony of one of these women. But
from our perspective, watching that means nothing. I saw the man running down the street, and I mean that doesn't. So just from my perspective, because I don't have the backstory, I don't see the evidence. I saw a man running down the street. You couldn't get into a court of law and say there was a man running down the street, guilty. You know what I'm saying? You
have four women testifying to things that happened to them. As far as whether or not members of my HOA association did this, I don't think anyone's really disputing that, because it never was disputed in court. It came down to who was the actor. Was it a HOA member or a board member?
Or someone else?
Well, I don't know, because
in theory, or someone else.
No, because if you were listening to the testimony, and I'd be happy to send it to you, if you read the testimony of the women, they're talking about people coming out of their homes and onto the streets. So these were people that certainly lived in this neighborhood. Now you could say,
I mean, like, I'm actually not trying to. I love the documentary, and I'm really enjoying talking to you. It's not like I'm trying to challenge what you're saying, but someone walks out my front door who doesn't live here and commits an assault. They don't live here. It's, so all I'm saying is that from a legal point of view, and this is one of the things about the precision of language that I've been wondering about a little bit about as well, is the evidence. It seems problematic to me that in this day and age where we film everything, that there must have been literally hundreds of cell phone cameras going every single night, that you recorded everything, that none of these things were caught on tape at all. That seemed problematic.
I did walk down the street and film the traffic, because I thought one day this could end up in court, and I want to show. And you see me walking down the street at one point where there's no traffic. And someone then says, one of the neighbors says, well, he filmed when there was no or there was no one there. But what you don't see is the next part of that clip. I whirl around and you could see like 500 people at my house.
Why didn't they show that?
I wish they had. I have the tape.
I've got some real specific questions as well to get go a bit deeper. This is like the deeper dive into the documentary.
Sure.
And it's more about kind of me wondering XYZ, why did that happen? Why did that happen? Why didn't that happen? Because, like, for example, and you may have done this, I was talking to someone as I was watching it last night again for the third time. And I was like, if I was Jeremy, what I probably would have done was gone to my neighbors and said, this is happening. What I will do is I will hire security guards to stand on the perimeter of your section, so no one will even step on your grass. Yes, it will be an imposition. But the way the documentary sells the thing, and this is what's foreign to me as a New Zealander, is that you and HOA were sort of at loggerheads. Now, you may dispute that by saying you went generously and they came back, but whatever. But you were sort of at conflict almost from day one. Let's say from day two. Mm-hmm. And then you never got a chance to have that conversation. So as an example, your wife wanted to make cookies and take them to the neighbors as a way of getting, and these are some quotes that she said. She said she was talking about having close relationships with the neighbors, and in the documentary she says, I always wanted that. She says, just to be friendly. She said neighbors are important. And I thought, well, if you've been in a conflict with someone, and I'm not even saying whose fault it was, but where both parties have mentioned suing one another, which as a New Zealander feels like sort of the height of aggression. Why would a person then go into a neighborhood thinking, these neighbors are going to like us? I would think you'd go into the neighborhood thinking, oh, well, we screwed up that one way or the other, and we're always going to be enemies. Now, maybe that's a cultural thing, and maybe everyone, sues each other so, excessively in America that you sue it, then you go and have a beer with them afterwards. But it seemed strange to me that there'd be a mindset of still being friendly with these people, that you'd just threaten to sue. And that was actually, according to the documentary, I'll say, you had made some pretty significant statements about quite serious legal action before you moved in. So then, was your wife unaware of all of this? Was she like a little bit naive to the conversation between you and the HOA?
Right. I think this is like Nicole Brown Simpson and OJ, right? When people ask, no, it is. When people come to me and they say, I'm confused, or why did you're a terrible husband, you dragged your wife. I'm like, no, she told me to sue them. She said,
but that's not what I'm asking. And I'm not saying you're a terrible husband. All I'm asking is, why did she think that there was going to be a happy, friendly, fun relationship after the two parties had threatened to sue each other?
The Nicole Brown Simpson thing. When did Nicole Brown Simpson decide she wanted to have a relationship with OJ? Well, it was certainly before the knife, right? So that's what happened here. I think people don't understand that when she said that in the film, she was talking about before she moved in. This was just sort of what she always wanted. After this happened, even after that first letter, she wanted nothing to do with these neighbors. I mean, mind you, very early on, a neighbor comes over and threatens to murder us. So she's not trying to have a relationship. In fact, after watching the film just weeks ago, my wife, not having ever seen into the inner workings of the relationships of these neighbors, we're seeing this for the first time. She's laughing about these people playing bunco and whatever. And she just said, I am so glad. She was jokingly, I don't want, and she's not here, so I think it's a little unfair, but she told me, she says, so you have to trust me on this, Pat, because she's not here. Right. She said, I'm just so glad I never had a relationship with these people. Look at their lives. But I think she was just joking. But she really did not want a relationship with people who were terrible. She dreamed of having a relationship with good neighbors before we bought our house.
Your wife said very clearly that neighbors are very important. What did you do to make your neighbors feel important, either before you moved in or as you moved in, if anything?
Yeah, I reached out to the president of the HOA and wanted to bring them into my whole idea. I had already, as you see from the film, consulted with.
But that's about your thing. What did you do to make them? I mean, what you're saying is, I made them feel official by inviting them into my thing. Was there anything else, like to just kind of come in and honor the space you're coming into, rather than? I
thought it would be fun for the neighbors. Right. So I kind of viewed it that way. I didn't view it as for myself. I always felt I could just do this anyway because there's no rule against it. Like I said in the film, you can see I consulted with other lawyers. There was no rule, absolutely no rule against it. So why was I calling then? I asked for the phone number for the president of the HOA from the seller of the home before I move in, because I wanted to be courteous. I was like, sort of, here's what I'm going to do. I haven't closed on this house. I won't for many months, but here's what I want to do. How would you guys like to get involved? I think it'd be really awesome if other neighbors did. So it's kind of just like, sort of felt like I was being kind and courteous.
So you probably already answered the second question, which was going to be, the Homeowners Association checked out last year's 2014's event and showed some concerns around the number of people. And I was going to ask, what did you do to waylay the concerns of the HOA about that event? Because to be honest with you, if my neighbor was having something with 3,000 people in their front yard, that might not be the right number, but thousands, I'd have some concerns about things like security, but it sounds like you've probably already answered that. So let's just keep moving on.
Yeah, that's what I told them I'm going to, I met with them. I mentioned I met with them with a realtor when I said, I'm going to give you 3 days to sign this or I'm going to sue you because you violated my civil rights. Now I didn't. I ended up moving in because instead of signing it, they went and walked a letter about our family. And I could send you that letter, Pat. But during that meeting, they kept changing the topic from the letter that they wrote me for obvious reasons. They didn't want to talk about what they wrote me. They said, well, what about this? What about this? And so I very methodically walked through, I'm going to get buses or shuttles. I'm going to get security. So I kind of walked through all of these different things.
Now you brought it up earlier, but I did want to talk to you about the Bible study and the guy they put in the documentary who said, crush them in the dirt, stomp them. There's other words used in the documentary. You talked about lawyers will destroy you. I have enough lawyers to destroy you.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about the Bible study, and I was thinking about your faith, because obviously your faith is a really important part of this, because it's you don't want to be, you think that you're being discriminated against based on your faith. I grew up in the Catholic Church. I've had a lot to do with the church for a very long time, still do. I'm interested to learn more about the kind of character of Jesus that you follow, because the one that I know of and read about and have read about, those kinds of phrases like, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. Those sorts of things don't, to me, speak to this character that I've learned about for such a long time. And I wanted to know from you, and you might say that your religion is your own business, and that's true, but because it's such a central part of this story, I'm really interested as to how all those things marry up, because I've heard you say the word turn the other cheek. I've heard you say things like that within this conversation, but
which I did.
Those phrases and that sort of, and I'm using the word aggression not in a negative, but it's like it's a forceful statement or whatever, don't seem to me to be a very good, accurate representation of the dude who is described as the Prince of Peace. And I just kind of wanted to speak to you and your understanding of who he is and who he is for you. And I'm not saying this in any kind of judgment or criticism of you, because I could ask the other side exactly the same thing, but they're not sitting in front of me. You are.
Yeah.
And there was just so much that seems in that was, and I'll use the word because it may be inaccurate, but it was how it was portrayed: ungracious, aggressive, angry, all sorts of things all the way through. So tell me about this guy Jesus that you, and I'll say supposedly because I don't know you, but I'm sure it's a well-held belief from you, but supposedly follow, and the teachings of peace and turning the other cheek, and if you're leave the speck of dust in your neighbor's eye when you've got a plank sticking out your own, those aspects of this character.
Yeah, well, like that's one of the most misunderstood Bible verses, in my opinion. When you hear about people talking about don't judge others, if you read the context of that verse, it's talking about hypocrisy. It's not saying you can't make judgments about someone. It's saying if you have a plank in your own eye, look at the plank in your own eye. And so, but yeah, I mean, the Bible is replete with examples of judging people. Go into the land that the Lord has given you and follow God's law. But if these people do not follow God's law, then, whatever. These are the enemies of God. Vanquish this enemy. Well, how do you know who that is? Unless you make determinations about people's, righteousness, sinfulness, whatever. So I don't think that's in my view, I think that's a very misunderstood part of the Bible. But going to your broader point, what is my belief? Well, Jesus was a man of peace. Jesus was a man who certainly would look at the prostitute. I hope I can say that on your show, and say, ye who have not sinned, throw the first stone, meaning, who are you to condemn this woman? So all of those things are true. Those are parts of the Bible. But Jesus also went to, for example, the Pharisees, and he called them vipers. So Jesus went into the temple, and he, saw people that were grifters who were overcharging for the sale of animals for sacrifices at the temple. And he saw what God's house had become was this temple of evil. And he went in there and he started throwing things around. And if you read all the Gospels, you find out it actually happened twice. I was so confused as a child because it's like, wait, these are two different. He went in there twice and did this, which is pretty interesting. So I think what it shows is that Jesus was a man of a complex. He wasn't a one-dimensional person. Of course, I believe he was God, but in the flesh, he was what he taught was, I think, turn the other cheek, but don't get stepped on. I think this goes to what's one thing I've said to many people over the years. I wish so badly Christians, or even not just Christians, but people who believe in tradition, who believe in respecting things that came before us, but especially Christians. Do you think that God, if God loves us, because Christians say that he does, would he want us to be doormats? I mean, I think that's the big question, right? You want to turn the other cheek. You don't want to be the one to throw the first punch. But I also think that God, if he loves us so much, doesn't want us to be stepped on. So there comes a point where you fight back. And I think that's what Don Brad.
Hang on. But on that, and look, we may have a very different interpretation as to who this character was. I'm saying the character of Jesus because some people think he's real, some people think he's not. We're just talking about the Jesus of the Bible. Yeah. Is that he actually did choose to be a doormat. You know, the thing about a lot of what happened with Jesus is when he had the right in the law and the moral high ground to like push back, he didn't. His crucifixion by itself was that he had the right to come down off the cross anytime he wanted to. He could have come down anytime he wanted to if you believe that he was the king. It was like the stoning the prostitute, the woman in adultery. What he's saying is, you have the right to do this in the law. You're allowed to. This is actually appropriate under the law of the day. You can do this, but unless you're all perfect, you shouldn't be doing it. So I actually think when I say doormat, some people may react to that because it's bad. I'm just using your word. What I'm saying is the times that Jesus had the right to push back and maybe use violence or maybe go, I'm in the right here, you're in the wrong, so I'm not going to be doing it. He typically went, turn the other cheek. And I mean, the crucifixion isn't a perfectly good example.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's why when I was in a Bible study and 12 or 11 other men said, you should turn the other cheek, I actually listened to them and I turned the other cheek and I moved into the neighborhood. And if you read between the lines in the film, you can see where I sort of then move in. And you see me kind of just, well, I'm just going to move in. Well, that's sort of the hidden detail there. Is I was told you should do this. And I listened to those people and I did not listen to Don. Don was the one that they decided to put in the film. Now, by the way, I will tell you that in the end, after having been my family threatened, my wife having to move to Virginia, I would say Don was the right one. And what he was saying was crush them into dirt because he said, look, the other context of what he was saying when he said it was, this happens so often. It's like Christians are the last group of people that it's like completely fine to like spit on and like laugh at and mock and step on because like, oh, well, like so many people are Christians and they've been around for a long time. They ran everything. So like I guess that's their like kind of like white privilege stuff or whatever it might be. They kind of like tie it into that. And so it's like, this happens for so often. And it's like, you know what, just enough of this. You should fight back. But what did I do? I didn't. And
but you did. But eventually you did. I mean, we can keep saying I didn't, I turned the cheek, I didn't. But we can skip all of that, and I accept, and we all accept that there was a point where you didn't, but then you did. So here's my question, though, right? And this might be the difference between how you and I interpret who this character of Jesus is, who Jesus is.
Sure.
In that moment, let's just say that I know it's you and your wife, but let's just say it's one of the disciples and Jesus, and one of the disciples is saying to Jesus, it's actually enough of this shit. It's time to push back. Let's do it. Let's actually take him down. It's appropriate. We've done everything we could to this point. It's actually time we take them down. What do you think Jesus would have done in that moment?
Well, we know what Jesus did because Peter cut off the ear of one of the Roman soldiers who arrested Jesus.
Yeah.
And Jesus, I guess, told Peter to stop. But I think
he didn't do it. So he wouldn't. So you're saying he wouldn't have done nothing. He wouldn't have fought back.
I don't. I think this is sort of different in the sense that Jesus was there on a mission, which was to be a sacrifice. He literally came to earth. And this is when I talk about Christmas and the importance of Christmas to the Christian faith is it's not just to look a little baby Jesus in a manger. The purpose of Jesus, we all talk about Jesus being Christians do, about Jesus being the first gift, the most important gift to the world. The gift for what? What was Jesus for? Well, even if you whether or not you believe in Jesus or not, even if you think it's a fairy tale, it's a beautiful fairy. If you believe it's a fairy tale, it is at least a beautiful one because what it is it's about Jesus coming to earth as sort of to die. That was like what he did. He came here to die. Why? To atone for the sins of the world. So it is, I think, I certainly would agree with you that you try and follow Jesus and his life and his teachings. But I think when you talk about comparing it to sort of his crucifixion, it's a little bit more complicated because I am not God, right? So I'm not here to die.
And I'm not someone to judge anyone or to say what people did right or wrong, but I love religion. It's a fascinating conversation to me as well. My understanding of the Christian faith is the Christians describe themselves as trying to be Christ-like, which means to emulate Christ. But what you sounds like you're saying now is that's what Jesus did. That was his job. My job is different. That doesn't sound like emulation of this character that people are supposed to be following.
I was making sort of an exception for the death on the cross. I was just saying, like, I don't think that we are called to die on crosses, right? I think Jesus.
Sure. But you've just talked about the ear being cut off and put back on. He stopped that. We're talking about the woman in adultery. He stopped that. It's now there may be a massive, and I acknowledge, cultural difference between American Christianity and what I grew up in New Zealand with, but that seems to be, to me, again, it might be a cultural difference just from the countries as well. Suing each other, aggressive words, crush them in the dirt. You can't stand the heat, get out of the fire. And I wrote down an hour and 8 into the documentary. I can't remember what it is, but you look at the thing and you speak to, you go, yeah, I got you on tape. I got you on tape to to Jennifer Scott, I think it was. None of that looks particularly Christ-like to me. And I'm only asking you this because you profess that your Christianity is such a strong part of you. If you were a Jewish or Muslim or atheist or whatever, I wouldn't ask you these questions. But because you do, I look at those images and I go, if I was going to put an example on the wall to my kids of what Christianity would be, and this is not a judgment of you, that kind of verbiage and words and actions wouldn't be what I want my child to see as an example of Christianity.
Right. Well, I mean, you could look to, for example, who was it who was the leading force behind the end of slavery in Great Britain? What was his name? William Wilberforce. Is that right? William Wilberforce.
I think so. The movie Amazing is about him, isn't it?
That's right. Right.
Yeah.
And so if you watch that film, he looks kind of like a lunatic right now. Of course, I mean, this is a film portrayal about someone who had died, 150, 200 years earlier. So maybe they got that wrong. I don't know, but I wasn't there. But hopefully they portrayed his life correctly. And all I have to go off of, I haven't ever read his writings, but I have seen that film. And in the film, assuming it is depicting his life properly, he's going around like a ranting lunatic, screaming about the evils of slavery, getting in people's faces, doing everything he can, sort of Boston Tea Party style. Like, we need to stop this evil, this wrong. And so I think, there comes a point, I would call it like tipping points, right? Where Christians should, this is just my view, I mean, maybe I get it. Other people have different views of Christianity. My view is you do turn the other cheek. You try and make peace with people. But when people are out to destroy you, or if this is sort of just one cog in the wheel of a culture war, and I'm just the next one, the next pin to fall, if you will, maybe it's time you just finally stand up and say, I've done what I can to stop this aggression. You won't do it willingly, so I'm going to have to file a lawsuit. And I mean, I think that's just sort of my position is I wasn't the first to do it. I wasn't the first to make the threat. I wasn't even the second or third. I did this literally filing it on the last day, Pat. And I did it at the request of my wife in defense of women who were being attacked. And I believe when I get to heaven, Jesus is going to look at me, my belief again, and say, well done, good and faithful servant. You fought for those who could not speak for themselves. You tried to defend the faith in a culture where that was under attack.
In the documentary, they basically say they misspoke in the letter. They said that they didn't have a final draft and they made an error. The part that you're clamping onto, what you're entitled to do, is something that they actually think was written clunkily. Where does the line between this is 100% absolutely what they mean and what they want, and they've worded something poorly and it's actually not the... And look, and I'm saying this graciously, a couple of minutes, maybe, if you've got a thought on that. Where is that line between they didn't write it well versus what they actually meant?
Well, I went to the HUD, which is the federal government, and said, hey, we got a problem here. And HUD said the people that federal government that sues, they come in and sue in fair housing cases. And they said this, and I said, I know if this was a racial thing, you wouldn't even have any doubt. You'd say, look, it's in writing. And they said, well, we just need proof of what it means. Basically your question. And that is when I called and recorded the phone call that day. Okay. And I called and said, what does this mean? Why are you guys doing this? And did you discriminate? Did you just use discriminatory language? So they admit it. Okay. I call back HUD and I said, it's only been a few hours, but now I have a recording. Here it is. And the person on the phone, an attorney, admitted, yeah, that's discrimination. So what does HUD do? Do they come in and represent me? They say, sorry, our focus right now is on large landlord-tenant issues. So it wasn't enough, even though now it was enough, because the federal government doesn't care about people like me. People are bothered by me because of a difference in political views, probably. They probably see me as more right-wing or more conservative.
Do you know what the other people your neighbors vote for? Do you know how they vote?
Well, a lot of them come at me and say stuff about Trump when I'm not even talking about Trump.
No, but what I asked you is, you know how they vote? Are they Democrats? Do you know that?
Yeah, most of the people that come at me start talking about politics. So I assume that part of the reason that a lot of them don't like me is certain political flavorings that come through the film.
And where my uncomfortability in conversation happens is the precise nature of language when we say things like "I assume." Unless we know, because there are Republicans who aren't fans of Trump, there are Republicans who are fans of Trump, there are Democrats who obviously aren't fans of Trump, and there are independents who are everything in between as well.
Yeah, it's other things, but a lot of people will contact me and use words that I'm not even talking about that are very political, that are very specific to Fox News, Republican Party. When meanwhile you have CNN legal analysts doing whole reports on why Jeremy Morris was absolutely discriminated against. And so I'm going, why is this limited to Fox News? So I feel like a lot of the hatred against me is a frustration by people of certain political affiliations. This is my opinion. Let me be clear. I believe it's a frustration that I actually caught people on a tape.
I think it's obvious to me why people probably come at you more with Fox News, and that's because Fox News does this thing every year, which, in my opinion, is a load of bullshit, which is the war on Christmas, when it looks like every mall in America and every main street in America has had some kind of, Santa's sack explode over it, and it's never been more Christmassy. To me, it's a beat up, and it's a victim mentality they play. So maybe they connect it more to Fox than the others. Maybe that's all. I just want to ask you something as well. I just looked up the film Amazing Grace, which is I wanted to make sure I got the right name of the film out there, which is the William Wilberforce conversation. And it relates directly to something said in the movie. And I wanted to ask you about this because you just compared your Christmas lights and Christmas candy canes and your ministry with the dude who helped get rid of slavery in America. It's a pretty big comparison. In the movie, you said, quote, that you see yourself as, quote, the protector of Christmas. You also said, quote, I wanted to be the guy who saved Christmas. And one of the other participants, one of the other members of the HOA, said that you compared yourself to Moses. They're all pretty lofty, massive sort of, massive. I mean, Moses, for those who don't know the story, led his people out of Egypt into the promised land. He's a pretty central figure in that whole story, pretty important person. As I said, you've just mentioned William Wilberforce being something like what you're doing, and the guy who saved Christmas and the protector of Christmas. Well, I mean, I wrote down here the protector of Christmas from what? Sure. What are we protecting Christmas from? But also, I mean, let me be blunt and put it from the outside looking in, because I could be, obviously I'm wrong, I don't know, but from the outside looking in, it seems fairly arrogant, those sorts of comparisons, should they be true, especially the Moses one. I mean, have you compared yourself to Moses, and how is that look from the outside? Now, I'm not calling you arrogant. I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying, it's like going, here's a person who freed a whole race of people through all of Europe. My Christmas lights, it's quite similar, isn't it? It just sounds big.
I'm glad you brought that up. No, a lot of what they said was completely lies. It never happened. But that one about Moses did happen. So, for example, when they say, I called this woman over and over and over, 4 times in my life that I ever spoke to the woman, 5 if you count the phone call that she made to me. So 5.
Hang on, stop. You've just said something that's contradictory to each other.
Sure.
You were talking about how many times you spoke to her. They talked in the I think about how many times you called her.
So maybe
So was there a day that you called her lots of times? Maybe you only spoke to her once, but maybe you called her 10 times.
Maybe called her 2 or 3 times to get her on the phone toward the end because I was trying to get the settlement agreement signed. And
so are you saying that you spoke to her 4 times and you maybe called her 6 times?
Yeah, 6, 7. Say 7 to be safe.
And look, just so you're clear, as I said, I know how this works. There was recreations, like you pulling the envelope out of the thing.
Yes.
The phone call.
Yes.
Her phone call with all the numbers, that's a recreation. There was no camera at the time, which is why I'm asking you the question. So are you saying here on the record, so to speak, that you maybe spoke to her 4 or 5 times, and let's say you called her a total of less than 10 times?
Yes, 100% yes. And so and thank you for saying the recreation thing, because my wife looked at me because, we were separate during all of our interviews. We were never together. They wanted to do it that way, and I was fine with that. So she looked at me like, how is that? And I said, oh, let me tell you. They had me add her name into my phone so you could look like I'm calling Jennifer Scott. And so they put my name in her phone, and they probably called it over and over, so it looked like she's scrolling through a few things. But I actually could pretty well prove this. And the reason is because I have the entire text conversation from the very beginning of what's basically a 2-week relationship. Very short period of time. Clearly, you could see the very first time and the very I'm never going to talk to you again. So unless someone says
we don't really need to go into the details, because what you're saying is that's inaccurate. Fine, done. That's inaccurate.
Yeah, so
what about the comparing yourself to William Wilberforce and Moses? I'd like to know about that.
I just want to make it clear. A lot of the things in the film are just lies. I think some of it's advice from a lawyer to make him look like a bully, because some of these things came later. They didn't say them initially in court. They came later on. Oh, he's a bully. He called us millions of times. So I think some of these were like ideas that they wanted to push. But in any case, I have text messages that prove that that's a lie. The Moses one actually is true. And the reason I brought up the texting and the phone calls as a comparison is just to say how it's interesting how sometimes things are lies and other times things are true, but they're so manipulated or half-truths that they totally get removed from the reality. The reason I mentioned Moses to people who are supporters of mine, I said, this is like Moses, because I kept going to these people for years and saying, let my family out of your HOA.
Let my family go. Let my family go.
It wasn't on purpose, let my family out, like comparing it to, you know what I mean? It was only like later on where I kept saying, let my family out of this HOA, that I'm like, wait a minute, that sounds a lot like, and I was just thinking it's funny. So it's kind of a humorous, like, this is like Moses. I'm begging them to get me out of the HOA. I don't even want money.
So what about the savior? Okay, so we won't go down that chat because you've said that a dozen times about no money. What about the savior of Christmas? What are you saving Christmas from? Christmas seems to be alive and well. More money is spent every year on Christmas celebrations in America than the year before. America looks like, as I say, it looks like a Santa's sack has exploded over the center of America, and every street and every mall is, and all that, they will look like your house, basically. Maybe not as good, but that sort of thing. What are you saving it from?
Well, so I mean, first off, I'm talking about like in this situation, in this community, in this state, what happened. There were thousands of people came to this, and it meant a lot to them. People would come off of a bus and hug me and say, I have no money. I can't, because we were raising money for children with cancer. I don't know if we've said that on the film yet, on this podcast yet, but we were raising money for children with cancer. But most of the people that came, we realized right away that the best, like, part of this was not initially what I conceived of a fundraiser. The thing itself was the charity aspect of it, more than raising money for children with cancer. Yes, we raised thousands and thousands of dollars for children with cancer, but the people came who had no money, and they'd hug me and they say, I didn't even have $20 to take my kids somewhere this Christmas. And so I'm looking at the people in their eyes, and I'm going, when I went to we did it the first house, and it was a surprise. It was not planned. And thousands of people come, and they're begging me, you have to do this every year. And I'm thinking, how do I tell these people that the city is telling me we'll never let you do this again? Okay. And of course, the reason, and I have no, by the way, I have no.
I'm just checking in. Are we still talking about you saving Christmas here? Because it sounds like you're talking about saving you putting the lights on your house. And to me, Christmas for every of those individual families is obviously a lot bigger than that.
For many of these people, they would come to me and talk about their childhoods and how they haven't been this happy since they were kids and this kind of thing. So, they were a lot of people had no money. And so this was the way that they could celebrate Christmas. They couldn't go to, there's a local resort in our town, and they have a $20 Christmas cruise. And they're like, they didn't do the Groupon discount this year so I could go on the cruise. And I'm going, wow, they really have no money. And so I'm looking at all these people who are depending on me to have Christmas. And I thought, wow, I need to fight for these people. But then it kind of morphed. It was both that, and I'm looking at the culture, and I'm seeing how, Santa Claus everywhere, sure. But if you go in the United States to a Walmart or one of these big stores or Target, you're lucky if you can even find a manger set. There aren't. In fact, in Walmart, they're literally, at least when I look around, maybe there is one. So if someone's listening, but I can't. It's at least so insignificant now that I have trouble finding that. You can go to some stores, like there's one called Hobby Lobby, and you find that stuff right away because that's owned by a famous Christian person who created a Bible museum in Washington, D.C. But with exceptions like that, Christmas has become a very secular sort of.
So here's Walmart. This is Walmart. I just looked at Walmart.com. I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Baby Jesus 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
In the store, Pat. Walmart sells every part of every car on their website. So I'm talking about in their stores. If you go through their stores, you'll see.
Walmart does sell lots of nativity stuff.
No, I'm not denying that you can't get this stuff, right? I'm speaking to the fact that Christmas has by and large become a lot of like happy holidays. I never made the war on Christmas thing. A lot of reporters would talk about the war on Christmas. I never used that term. That was like, they try and put me in a box that some other people came up with a term. I came to sort of agree with it in a certain way. I'm only speaking of my story, Pat. But and I came to agree.
When you say saving Christmas, and sorry to cut you short, but it's getting to a point where I do need to expedite and wrap this up. When you're saying saving Christmas, what I hear you now explaining it is you're saving the Christmas that you're putting on for people who consider your light show, your demonstration, a big part, or in fact, you're actually saying their complete, which seems completely weird to me, but their complete Christmas experience. When you're saying you're saving Christmas, you're not talking about all of America being saved by Jeremy Morris. You're talking about how it impacts the people that are involving with you and saving that.
It began as the first one, as the former, right? It began as I'm trying to save it for these people. But as this became a worldwide story, people started looking up to me like, hey, I really feel like some of our culture is under attack. Like it's becoming unpopular to talk about the baby Jesus or whatever. It's sort of like becoming like more of employees at stores are told not to use words like Merry Christmas. Instead, they do Happy Holidays. I'm not there. I don't know all those personal stories. You read about a lot of that stuff, and not only on Fox News. But here's the thing. I began defending other people around the country who have had similar things. And I'll give you one example that only is like 30 seconds. In HOA in North Carolina, went after a family last Christmas, so 1 year ago Christmas, because they had a cross in their yard. They found this cross. By the way, this is an African-American family. So anyone that does the whole, you're a white supremacist, because whatever the crap that means, because I'm talking about Christmas, I literally defended, and it's the most passionate case I've ever had, a black family. Sure. But they found this cross in a road, and they put it back together. It was a beautiful story. Put it in front of their house, and their HOA came to them, didn't just say, we're going to fine you $100 a day, but they said, you have to find us Bible verses. This is in a letter that prove that the cross has anything to do with the Christmas holiday. Well, let me just say, I went after their HOA. I saw them in the media. I reached out to them, and I said, listen, something needs to be, and they looked up my story. They saw what happened to my family. And so I went after their HOA, and guess what happened? They won a very substantial settlement because it was a violation of the law. So basically at this point, where my family, I waited years to sue and did all this stuff, I'm done. I am now a culture crusader. I'm done with families being treated like garbage because what? They're going to put a cross in front. By the way, in their flower bed up against their house, not on the lawn, way out in front of it, like almost on the house. You can look up stories of this. It's the North Carolina couple. And I ended up doing this now. I've done this now with 8 families. I did 2 this Christmas. So in other words, when I'm talking about the savior of Christmas, the guy that no one say savior, the guy that saved Christmas, I kind of became de facto that guy that fights for people who actually care about celebrating the way that people used to celebrate. They used to be kind of seen as beautiful and awesome, and now is laughed at and maligned as some stupid fairy tale. How many people, Pat, over the last couple of months since this film came out, write to me mocking us about fairy tales? Okay, even on Christmas Day, people who are saying, I'm a terrible person, and someone is writing in the same sentence of a terrible person because of you and your fairy tales. And I'm going, even if you think I'm a terrible person, didn't you just become a terrible person by on Christmas Eve?
Yeah, of course. They're hypocrites.
So
a question for you, and this is not based around you. I don't know you, and I don't know your political beliefs or personal beliefs, but it is based around a lot of people who have had this conversation for 20. I've been in media for more than 20 years, so I've heard sorts of conversations. Do you remember when they wanted to build a mosque at 9/11?
Yes.
Were you in support of that?
I thought it was offensive. I did. Great question. Like, this is the question I was asked in court, was what if a neighbor wanted to put a half moon Ramadan thing on their lawn? And I said, it's America, they're allowed to. And I think they thought that, no, they were not ready. Every lawyer should know the first thing in being a lawyer, never ask a question you're not ready for the answer. And so, yes, just because I don't support something or I oppose it doesn't mean that I'm going to push my way. And that's the whole point here. We had neighbors at that first meeting with the man with the cane that's bashing the cane in the concrete, who stood up and said, you know the law better than us. You're a lawyer. And you know what? I'm sure you can do this. This is a woman in our neighborhood, and says, but we don't want it. And I'm going, says who? You? So
this is an interesting part about. Now, unfortunately, look, we're not going to have time to get into this, because I actually want a part of this conversation to be more about the culture and stuff. One of the weaknesses, because America is a foreign country to most of the rest of the Western world for lots of reasons. One is the healthcare question. 2 is the guns. There's also the situation of individualism. Now, America is a country of individualism, and what that does is it breeds great entrepreneurs, it breeds great businessmen, it breeds great people who want to get something and go for it and be the best in the world at it. Where it sucks ass is when it comes down to things like community spirit and being together. You know what? If a whole community doesn't want something, but one individual does, I want, I can, my right, can be, is not really. It's not that it's not how the rest of the world works, but it's like the thing with COVID at the moment. And don't want to get into a debate with you about COVID or not. It's irrelevant. But New Zealand is quite we're a society that does look after our neighbor, and we do think collectively quite a lot.
Sure.
So when it hit here, basically 5 million of us went inside for 5 or 6 weeks, and then we lived for 14 months without COVID in our country. Mm-hmm. America, the land of the great individual, did that at the start, and then my rights, I don't want, don't tell me what to do. Government can't do it. I'm going out. 800,000 people dead. You know, death rate in New Zealand is 10 people per million. Death rate in America is over 2,500 people per million. Now, I'm not getting into a debate about what that is and who that is, but what I'm saying is the weaknesses of the great individualistic American ideal is then, I believe, from looking from the outside in, is then community-based conflict. If a community doesn't want something, if a community would rather not have someone, I think in a more of a collective country, you come into that community going, I want to be a part of this community. And I'm not actually, this is actually not about you, because I know you're going to say you did, but you come into it. Yeah. You say that you did come in saying you want to be a part of the community.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But it seems that that's one of the differences in the culture of maybe even America to the rest of the Western world, that great individuals. We actually don't have time to get into that. It's a shame that some are, we talked a lot about some other bits and pieces, but that's how podcasts go.
I appreciate the opportunity to be on and on your program. You've asked fantastic questions.
Well, I do have 2 other ones to finish with.
By the way, I have been vaccinated. And in fact, I'm getting a booster shot soon. I also caught the virus, even though I was vaccinated, but I'm sure that will give me greater immunity. But no, I believe in protecting the community. And that's one of the reasons I talked to my friends and said, hey, I actually think even though vaccination, maybe there might be side effects, I don't know, but I'm very concerned about, let's say, a child giving it to an older person. And so that's why I might say, maybe it might make sense for some kids to get vaccinated. That makes it toxic. People think I'm the devil, but no, I'm going to always speak the truth as I understand it. So I actually support what you're saying. I support not so much specifically about COVID, but the broader point that you're making, which is that we need to think about the community. I think the difference here, and maybe we should end with this, to just close, if you want, ask another one, but I think the difference here is the intent. If the community had said, hey, we actually have a serious concern here about fill in the blank. There were actually talks about the camel going rampant and crazy. I mean, seriously, this is a 26-year-old camel who barely could stand on her feet. She was so old. But they were trying to push this idea of a camel going berserk that had been at festivals all over the state and millions of children, or maybe thousands of children, had given carrots to. But in any case, if it had been about a serious concern, and I would have obviously loved to work through that concern. I was doing that even though I didn't have to on the traffic issue. But when you happen to know what the intent is, and they've told it to you in writing, and you think you're trying to get out of your mind the racial comparison, and I can't remove it from my mind that if this had happened to me and I was black, what would people do? What would people think? How wrong would that be? And the answer is obviously that would be disgusting. And so I'm going, why then is it any different? And once I came to that conclusion, Pat, then it became whatever you think you don't want in your community, you have just committed a crime, and your reasons for not wanting it have been communicated. And I'm going to stand firm on principle, and I will never go anywhere because of what you have done. And because I viewed it in that sort of racial context of like, if this was the shoe was on the other foot, if this was
I got that. I understand, but I guess I guess you will discover over the forthcoming days, weeks, months, maybe even years, whether you were happy with that decision or not. Like you're talking about $1.3 million, whether that will be a good or bad decision, I guess, the future will give you the answer to that.
Pat, my life has pretty much been wrecked through this situation. I'm certainly not better off for it in terms of financially, in terms of the loss.
I'm not meaning financially. I'm just saying in general.
Yeah, in terms of the time with my family, I think one of the things in the film that gets misunderstood is when I talk about I lost time with my family, I lost time with my wife. Was it all worth it? And I say yes. I would repeat that 1,000 times. I don't take any of those words back, but some people would take that, misinterpret it, probably on purpose, that somehow I don't care about my family. And to my view is, I view it sort of like the American Revolution. Some guy sees a rifle on his fireplace and says, I can either leave my family, my little children behind, my wife, possibly get killed, never come back, and fight for this thing that I believe in, which is to have a separate self-governing state, country, or I could just stay at home. So the question is like, at what point do values and principles matter? And that's actually the example that I gave my wife at the time. Was I realized this is hurting our family. This has been a disaster for our family. But at the end of the day, if I don't fight, and I'm a lawyer, then who would stand up and say, no, this is wrong? And it may be a minor thing to you. It may seem stupid, but I've used the example of Rosa Parks in the United States. I don't know if people in New Zealand know Rosa Parks.
The bus. Yeah, absolutely.
The bus. I'll end with this because I see you have to go. But I've said this example, and I think it's really a smart example. I said, if Rosa Parks was trying to break through the colored glass ceiling, making a little joke there because they thought about the glass ceiling,
Yeah.
Let's say a racial glass ceiling, and in that she was making $10 million and was seeking a promotion, and because she was black, was denied the extra 10 mil. So, I mean, in terms of what is factually more important, sitting at the back of the bus or $10 million, I think everybody would agree $10 million, way more of an important deal. But if that had been her story, would anyone know who Rosa Parks is? Of course not. The point is she was willing to go to jail over something stupid, something so utterly insignificant. And I looked at my situation and said, that's kind of like this, in that people look at it and go, Jeremy, it's just Christmas lights. Just do what they want. Just shut it down. You don't have to do this, or do it somewhere else. And it was the point that because they had communicated why they were trying to shut it down, I figured out that there were certain people that did not have the same beliefs as my family and were trying to exclude it from the neighborhood because they didn't want those beliefs in the neighborhood. Once I figured that out, I said, wait a minute. So at what point do we stand for something and put our foot down? And I thought, yeah, I'm going to put my foot down. And if it costs me everything I have, and it did, then so be it. And that's why this became a national story.
Last question for you. I mean, like, one of the things about today is I like to let people talk until they're finished and then answer and go backwards and forwards. So it's been a great conversation. I've enjoyed it a lot. I'm going to leave you with one thought, and you can, I mean, hopefully you've seen with this conversation that, you know, I'm well researched, and there's I've had a look at things quite broadly. I have some probably world perspectives that might be similar to you in some areas and some that might be very different. But the one thing that I would say that I think, and I would hope that you would reconsider, is there's, in my opinion, and you might have reason for this, sometimes the language that you're using is quite, you decide what people's intentions are or what they are. For example, when you were sitting with your wife watching the appeal on YouTube and the other lawyer said something, you went, he's a commie. He's a commie. He's a commie. And for people who don't know what that means, you're calling him a communist. And I just sat there and thought, okay, I do this a lot in life. I go, what's the metric for that statement? So a communist is someone who believes that the state should control the flow of goods and services and put everyone on equal field. With him making the statement that he made, and with him making a statement contrary to yours, what metric was it that got you to then be confident that he was a communist? And I thought to myself, I wonder if that's because you are a professed Christian, and obviously you were worried about the word, you know, prostitute on a show, which constantly and often you hear the word fuck, it's not a problem.
Okay,
I wonder if that's a word that gets used a bit like how people use the word Nazi when they're not talking about Nazis and commies, and that's, I was wondering to ask you this, if there was a phrase you use which basically means you're a fuckwit, but because of your feeling you can't use that bad word, and so you use a different word. Now before I let you respond, there was another one as well, and this is something off your YouTube channel, and you were talking about the judge.
Yeah.
But guess what? The corrupt federal judge Windmill, who tried to rig a jury, who's now facing a misconduct charge that I filed against him, he agreed with him.
Now, this is the big part that I wanted to check. But the judge is a hateful anti-Christian bigot. Now, I know he's probably made some decisions in you that you might lead you to that conclusion, but I just wonder, what's the metric for you to use these absolute black and white statements when maybe that might be your opinion, but when it's written down like that from someone who's done this for a very long time, I'm like, that if it's not accurate, it could possibly be defamatory. But what is the position there? And I'm not saying this because I'm criticizing you and saying that they're right and you're wrong, because I'm asking you this because you're in front of me. You're the person having the interview with me. That there was a lot of times when you were talking about what their intention was, that he was a commie, that he's a bigot. And watching the documentary, and part of this is probably because of the clipping and the editing floor, is it looks like they disagree with me, so this is what they are. Other times there might be a big backstory.
Right.
And I just wonder, honestly, you know, in 60, 90 seconds, 2 minutes, if you can speak to that, when I look at that and I think, and because I'm actually sort of challenging you a little bit to the language that you use, especially as a lawyer, where if you're in a courtroom would have to be so precise, which sometimes seems very broad, and using terms which are making decisions yourself, which maybe there's not a metric for. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Great question. I would say the first one falls very much under the cutting room floor, and I'm not disparaging Apple again. Let me make that clear. Apple, I don't want you to sue me. So, and they told me I can't really speak to the film. I can only speak to my own personal experiences. And so that's what I'm doing with you, not being critical of the film. Let me be clear. But obviously sometimes things can't fit in the film. But if you look carefully at when I said that guy is a communist, I think right before or right after that, I mentioned how he had stated I couldn't assemble, or people could not assemble on my property. So there was more to that conversation where I described during the appeal as we're watching that.
But would you concede that one statement is not enough to actually accurately cast him as a communist?
I don't agree with you, because when we were in court, this is not during the appeal. I was describing a thing that happened in court, of which there is a transcript. He had a picture shown to me of children standing on snow. Okay. And there are a lot of probably 100 people on where the driveway is. And then there's some snow. And he wanted to know, well, where are those people standing? They're kids, And I said, well, it's snow. Well, what's under the snow? I said, well, I guess that, and I'm drawing it with my finger, this 2-week-long trial. So we're going through these documents. And I said, well, that would be the grass, and this would be the driveway. So he says something to the effect of, and I'm going to paraphrase, like, I don't know if it's an exact quote, but something to the effect of, so they're assembled. Those children are then assembled, and it's on your property. And I said, yes. No further questions. And let me just tell you, as an American that has a constitution that respects property rights, okay, the fact that he literally used the word, like the actual word, assembled, which is like an inalienable right. The idea being that these are rights from God, but some of them they actually put in the Bill of Rights. Like, these are obviously all inalienable rights. Nobody can take them away in any society. At least that's how the world should operate. That's what the founding fathers believed. But we're going to delineate some of them. And some of them, they talk about speech and assembly. And here is a guy without even a compunction of guilt or any kind of, like, I'm in a federal courtroom in front of a judge, in front of a jury, in front of a gallery of hundreds of people, that I'm going to literally condemn the fact that people were standing on a man's property. It's my land. Now, a communist does not believe in property rights. And if you look at what this attorney has done with other cases, these are the kinds of things that this attorney has been pushing for years. So actually, while maybe he's a free market guy because I'm looking at the size of his house, he's certainly willing to take a big check. I get that. But the guy does not believe that people have the freedom to have property. And in my view, that is a basic tenet of a communist. Someone might disagree with me, but I believe property rights are a fundamental, the antithesis of what a communist would believe. This guy has spelled it out.
Not. I mean, he may or may not be a communist. I have no idea. But property rights is not the cornerstone of what it means to be a communist. But sounds like what you're saying is there's more information there. I mean, I used to have a conversation with a leader of a political party in New Zealand when I was working on talk radio, who was the leader of it's called the ACT Party, who are libertarians, and he would say, in the House, I always vote for the issue that brings freedom. And I would always say to him, yeah, but when you're voting for freedom for one person, you might be imposing something on someone else. For example, the freedom to live a peaceful and quiet, time in my house versus hundreds of people in the street. The freedom not to get a vaccine versus the freedom to be around people with a lesser chance of it passing on. Your freedom, not you personally, but one's freedoms can also impinge on someone else's rights. It's not quite as black and white as that.
And that is why I said if there was a legitimate, even halfway legitimate reason from the beginning of, hey, could you not do this or could you do this? Obviously, I would have been there to accommodate whatever that would have been. The problem is it's a 2-hour program. They hate that fact because it's humiliating to them. It's 2 hours for 5 nights in the middle of nowhere on a sharp curve, and people are bussed in. They're not even brought in by car, while the neighbors are closing a road for the 4th of July and launching shells. They didn't know I was filming that for 3 years straight, for 3 years, and that would be played to a jury. The jury, which is allowed to ask questions, had more questions about that of me when that footage was played in court than on any other thing. And it was because of the hypocrisy. Pat, I don't care what people have 3 dogs or 5 dogs or 10 dogs, but when a rule says you can only have 2, and meanwhile, I'm not violating a livestock provision, but they're saying you're violating animal provisions and they're not. I'm just going, so the point is I agree with you. I actually agree with what you're saying. When you talk about, I believe in freedom, but when that clashes with my freedom to, for example, I think what you're saying is have quiet enjoyment of my home. I'm with you. The problem is that just never happened. What do you have, Bing Crosby music quietly wafting through the trees for 2 hours, barely audible, because I couldn't have external speakers. That was a provision. So what I did is I had speakers in my house, in the windows, playing, White Christmas. There's like, and as you can see from the photographs there, this is basically, it's on my property, for 2 hours.
All right. Well, if people want to find out more about you, I'm on the Facebook page right now for people who are watching. It is the Christmas Lighthouse Foundation. The website is thechristmaslighthouse.org. The YouTube channel is, just look up The Christmas Lawyer on YouTube. That's the easiest way to find it. And Jeremy, I think it is time for us to sign off after speaking for 9 or 10 hours. And I really appreciate you giving us some time. I enjoyed the documentary a lot. I think it raises some fascinating questions. Maybe another day in the future we can talk more about, the American culture rather than the American culture around Christmas, but actually in general, and what the rest of the world sees when they look in versus what America sees when they look out to the rest of the world. But it's been fun today. I really appreciated your time, and
I've appreciated great questions. You've been a fantastic interviewer. And I'm going to say this, and I do not mean to exaggerate. I think you've asked better questions than anyone that I've ever interviewed with. And I'm not trying to boast or be arrogant. I know people call me a narcissist or whatever, and which is a joke because I have actually some issues now with depression. Narcissists are not. But anyway, I just want to say I really mean it when I say you have done a better job asking better questions, and I have been on hundreds of programs. And so again, I don't want to boast, or that's not an arrogant statement. I'm just saying you clearly are very good at what you do, and I appreciate.
But one of the reasons for that, quite simply, is that we have time. It's not a 7-minute interview jam between 2 adverts.
You asked hard questions. You asked hard questions, and I love the opportunity to answer anything. I mean, nothing's off limits. I'm happy to share anything about any of this with anybody. I'm very transparent, and that's why I think, unfortunately, I have to record a lot of things because I believe a lot of people don't tell the truth. And so, I'm just like, well, here's tapes of these things. And but I always want to be honest, and I want to keep other people honest. And so I have nothing to hide. And so certainly your questions about me comparing myself to Moses and everything else, I found them very entertaining, but very interesting and very good.
The Christmas Lawyer, Jeremy Morris. Jeremy, thanks for joining us today. It's been a blast.
Thank you. Can I say mate?
You can say mate. Get a mate. Oh, you say cheer. Say cheer, bro. CHUR. Cheer, bro. See you later. Cheer, bro.
See you later. Cheer, bro.